everybody, I'm going to read some fairy tales today, and the first one is called Harold's Fairy Tale. Do you like Harold? I love Harold and his purple crayon. I wish I could go all over and really draw with a crayon and those things could really come true. But you know what? Imagination is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And so I love to imagine with Harold. And this is Harold's Fairy Tale. One evening, Harold got out of bed, took his purple crayon and the moon along, and went for a walk in an enchanted garden. Whoa, nothing grew in it. Why, if he hadn't known it was an enchanted garden, Harold scarcely would have called it a garden at all. To find out what the trouble was, Harold decided to ask the king. That's a good person to go to in an enchanted garden. Kings live in large castles. Harold had to make sure the castle was big enough to be the king's. He didn't want to waste time talking to any princes or earls or dukes. He wanted to go right to the king. This was a king's castle, all right. It had tall towers and a big drawgate to keep out people the king didn't want to see. But when the drawgate was drawn closed, oh dear, it kept Harold out too. Now what is he going to do? Harold shouted for the king to come down and let him in, but the gate didn't open. He walked along the edge of the enchanted garden beside the smooth wall of the castle until he thought of his purple crayon. That's sort of like a magic crayon, isn't it? A person smaller than a very small mouse would be able to get in. Without even bending, he walked into a very small mouse hole. He walked through the mouse hole into the castle. He invited the mouse in too, but the mouse preferred to stay outside. As he gazed around inside the big castle, Harold felt very tiny. And a king might not pay attention to anybody who was smaller than a mouse, so Harold used his purple crayon again. He made sure he was as tall as 4.5 steps of stairs, his usual height. Then he climbed up the stairs looking for the king. He went up and up and up until he got so tired, he couldn't climb another step. Luckily, there were no more steps. He had reached the top. He still couldn't find the king, but he remembered that kings sat on thrones. The king's throne looked very comfortable. Harold thought the king wouldn't mind if he just rested a few minutes. He sat on the throne, wondering what it was like to be a king and to wear a crown. He tried it with the king's crown. It was all right for a while, but the crown just began to feel so heavy on his head. So Harold put it on the king's head. As he thanked the king for the loan of the crown, he noticed the king looked sad, no doubt because of the garden. He asked the king if the trouble was due to a witch or a giant. The king couldn't say which. He looked sad and helpless. Evidently the giant or witch, if the king couldn't tell which it was invisible. But Harold told the king not to worry. He set off to find the invisible witch or the giant, brandishing his purple crayon, and accidentally, it made a hole in the wall. The accident embarrassed Harold, but the hole was the handiest way out of the castle, and he climbed through it. When he looked down from the other side of the hole, he realized he had forgotten how high up he was. He needed something tall to climb down. Oh, something as tall as a steeple. To fill the hole in the castle, Harold put a handsome and useful clock in it. He was surprised to see how late it was. He slid down the steeple to find the invisible witch or the giant right away. It wasn't a steeple. Oh no, it was a pointed hat. It was a giant witch. Oh no, watch out, Harold. Watch out. The purple crayon made it plain. It was an invisible giant witch. Well, no wonder nothing grew in the enchanted garden. How could anything grow, Harold said to himself, with a giant witch trampling around with great big feet? Now that he saw what the trouble was, all Harold had to do was to drive the witch out of the enchanted garden. Mosquitoes! Mosquitoes, Harold knew. They'll drive anybody out of a garden. So he started drawing mosquitoes. The mosquitoes drove out the witch. They also were driving Harold out of the garden. He had to make smoke to get rid of all those mosquitoes. Wow, that's a lot of mosquitoes. And he had once heard somebody say that where there's smoke, there must be fire. And to put out the fire, the first thought that he had was of fire engines. But he decided to make it rain. Rain was much easier. The rain soaked everything, Harold too. But he said it's good for the flowers. He was right. Soon there were flowers. Look at how beautiful. Beautiful flowers popped up all over the enchanted garden, more than Harold was able to count, and they all were in gorgeous bloom. Harold thought how delighted and happy the king would be when he looked out from the castle in the morning. Oh, he's going to be so pleased. And then amazingly, the last flower turned out to be not a flower at all, but a lovely fairy. She held out her magic wand as fairies always do when they're giving somebody wishes that will come true. Look at that. A magic fairy. Harold couldn't think of a thing to wish for, but to be polite, he took one wish and told the fairy he'd use it later. Besides, Harold thought, as he started on his long walk home, a wish might come in handy sometime. I think it would. After all the excitement, he suddenly felt tired, and he stopped to rest a while. He sat on a small rug because the ground was still somewhat damp from the rain. And you know what he did? He wished. He wished the rug was a flying carpet. At once Harold felt it rise in the air. It flew fast and high. Ooh! But when it went so fast it left the moon behind, Harold realized he didn't know how to stop the carpet or even slow it down. He wished he'd taken 2 wishes from the fairy so he could wish the flying carpet would land. But he did have his purple crayon, and he landed the flying carpet in his living room, right behind the high-backed chair his mother sat in, knitting. He was home. And he asked her to read him a story before he went back to bed. Oh, I'm glad Harold made it home, and he helped the king and had some fun adventures on the way. This is another fairy tale, Red Riding Hood, and this one is by James Marshall. I always love James Marshall's books. So, Red Riding Hood. A long time ago, in a simple cottage beside the deep dark woods, there lived a pretty child called Red Riding Hood. She was kind and considerate, and you know what? Everyone loved her. One afternoon, Red Riding Hood's mother called to her. "Granny isn't feeling up to snuff today," she said, "so I've baked her favorite custard as a little surprise. Now be a good girl and take it to her, will you?" Red Riding Hood was delighted. She loved going to Granny's, even though it meant crossing the deep, dark woods. Whoa. When the custard had cooled, Red Riding Hood's mother wrapped it up and put it in a basket. "Now, whatever you do," she said, "go straight to Granny's. Do not tarry. Do not speak to any strangers." "Yes, Mama," said Red Riding Hood. Before long, she was in the deepest part of the woods. "Oh," she said, "this is a little bit scary." Oh, poor Red Riding Hood. Suddenly, a large wolf appeared. "Good afternoon, my dear," he said. "Care to stop for a little chat?" "Oh, gracious me," said Little Red Riding Hood. "Mama said not to speak to any strangers." But the wolf had such charming manners. "And where are you going, sweet thing?" he said. "Oh, I'm on my way to visit Granny, who lives in the pretty yellow house on the other side of the woods," said Red Riding Hood. "She's feeling poorly, and I'm taking her a surprise." "You don't say," said the wolf. Just then he had a delightful idea. "No reason why I can't eat them both," he thought. "Oh, allow me to escort you," he said. "You never know what might be lurking about." "Oh, you're too kind," said Little Red Riding Hood. Beyond the forest, they came to a patch of sunflowers. "Why not pick a few?" suggested the wolf. "Grannies love flowers, you know." But while Red Riding Hood was picking a pretty bouquet, the clever wolf hurried on ahead to Granny's house. "Who is it?" called out Granny. "Oh, it is I, your darling granddaughter," said the wolf in a high voice. "Oh, the door is unlocked," said Granny. "Surprise!" cried the wolf. Granny was furious at having her reading interrupted. "Get out of here, you horrid thing!" she cried. But the wolf gobbled her right up. He didn't even bother to chew her. Tasty," he said, patting his belly. "So tasty." Just then he heard footsteps on the garden path. "Here comes dessert." And losing no time, he put on Granny's cap and glasses. He jumped into bed and he pulled up the covers. That wicked wolf. "Who is it?" he called out in his sweetest Granny voice. "It is I, your little granddaughter," said Red Riding Hood. "The door is unlocked," said the wolf. Red Riding Hood was distressed at seeing her grandmother so changed. Why, Granny," she said, what big eyes you have." "Oh, the better to see you, my dear," said the wolf. And Granny, what long arms you have." "Oh, the better to hug you, my dear," said the wolf. And Granny, what big teeth you have." "The better to eat you, my dear," cried the wolf. Oh no, watch out, Little Red Riding Hood." And he gobbled her right up. "I'm so wicked," he said, "so wicked." But really he was enormously pleased with himself, and having enjoyed such a heavy meal, he was soon snoring away. A hunter passing by was alarmed by the frightful racket. "That doesn't sound like Granny," he said. "Look at that bad wolf." And so the brave hunter jumped in the window, killed the sleeping wolf, and cut him open. Out jumped Granny and Red Riding Hood. "Oh, we're ever so grateful," said Red Riding Hood. "That wicked wolf won't trouble you again," said the hunter. "It was so dark in there I couldn't read a word," said Granny. Red Riding Hood promised never ever to speak to another stranger, charming manners or not. Whew. That was a good hunter that saved him. And she never, ever did speak to another charming stranger again. Little Red Riding Hood. I love fairy tales. They're fun to imagine and to think about. You know, they're not really real, are they? So sometimes you might make up your own fairy tale. Well, I'm going to say goodbye for now and good night. And I love you all. Here's a big kiss. Oh, here's one more kiss. Can you throw me one? Oh, I got it. Thank you. I love you. Bye.
Amen.